This is not a drill, and this is not clickbait. And if you use an Android phone, you need to stop what you are doing and pay attention for the next several minutes. Because what Google is rolling out with Android 16 is the most aggressive lock-in move the company has ever made, and the deadline to protect yourself is closer than you think. Android 16 is introducing mandatory Google account authentication requirements that fundamentally change the relationship between you, your phone, and Google's data collection infrastructure in ways that cannot be undone after the update installs. The window to prepare your exit strategy before June 2026 is narrow and closing fast, and by the end of this video, you'll have a complete and specific plan for exactly what to do before that deadline arrives. Let me explain precisely what Android 16 is changing and why it matters more than any previous Android update in the platform's history. Previous versions of Android allowed users to set up and operate their devices without a Google account, using what is called the local account option during setup. This was not a prominently advertised feature, and Google made it progressively harder to find with each Android version, but it existed, and millions of privacy-conscious users relied on it to operate Android devices without feeding behavioral data into Google's advertising infrastructure. Android 16 eliminates this option entirely on devices that ship with Google Mobile Services, which covers essentially every Android phone sold through major retailers globally outside of China. After Android 16 installs, a Google account is not optional. It is mandatory for device activation. There's no local account bypass. There's no skip button hidden in the setup flow. There is no developer option workaround available to ordinary users. You authenticate with Google, or the phone does not activate. The implications of this change extend far beyond the inconvenience of being required to create an account if you do not have one. When your Android device is tied to a mandatory Google account, every interaction with the device feeds data into Google's behavioral profile associated with that account in ways that are structurally unavoidable, regardless of what privacy settings you configure afterward. Your location history, your app usage patterns, your communication metadata, your search behavior, your purchasing signals, and your daily routine all flow into Google's advertising intelligence system as a condition of using the hardware you purchased. You are not opting into a service. You are paying for hardware that has been engineered to require participation in Google's data collection ecosystem as a non-negotiable condition of basic functionality. The timing of this change is not accidental. Google is making this move in June 2026 because the regulatory environment in major markets has been tightening around data collection, consent requirements, and the company is moving to establish mandatory account authentication as the baseline before those regulations potentially impose stricter requirements around what data can be collected without explicit ongoing consent. Locking users into account-linked devices before consent frameworks tighten creates a structural data collection relationship that is significantly harder to challenge retroactively than one that users enter into voluntarily after being clearly informed of the implications. Your exit plan starts with understanding what your realistic options are given your specific situation and your specific privacy priorities. The options divide into 3 categories depending on how far you're willing to go to escape mandatory Google account authentication on your mobile device. The first option is de-Googled Android, which means installing an Android-based operating system that has had Google's proprietary services and surveillance infrastructure removed and replaced with privacy-respecting alternatives. Graphene OS is the most security-focused and most thoroughly audited option, and it runs on Google Pixel hardware specifically, which creates a specific irony that is worth acknowledging. You are buying hardware made by Google to run an operating system specifically designed to eliminate Google's data collection from that hardware. Graphene OS is not a hobbyist project. It is maintained by a professional security team, receives regular updates, passes security, audits that flagship commercial operating systems would struggle to match, and has been recommended by prominent security researchers, including Edward Snowden, as a genuinely secure mobile platform. Installation requires a computer, a USB cable, and approximately 1 hour of focused attention following the official installation guide. It is not a process requiring advanced technical knowledge, but it does require following instructions carefully and completely. Calyx OS is the second de-Googled Android option, and it occupies a middle position between Graphene OS's uncompromising security focus and the usability expectations of mainstream users. Calyx OS includes MicroG by default, which is an open-source reimplementation of Google's core services that allows many Google-dependent applications to function without connecting to Google's actual infrastructure. This means applications that technically require Google Play services can often run on Calyx OS through the MicroG layer without establishing a direct data relationship with Google. Calyx OS supports a broader range of hardware than Graphene OS, including several Motorola and Fairphone devices alongside Pixel hardware, which is significant for users whose current phone is not a Pixel and who do not want to purchase new hardware as part of their exit plan. Lineage OS is the third de-Googled Android option, and it supports the widest range of hardware by a significant margin. If you have a phone that was released in the last 4 years, there is a reasonable probability that Lineage OS supports it and can be installed to escape the mandatory Google account requirement. Lineage OS does not include Google services by default and can be configured to operate entirely without them, though the installation process varies more significantly between different supported devices than the more standardized Graphene OS and Calyx OS installations. The trade-off for the broader hardware support is less consistent security update cadence across supported devices and more variable installation complexity depending on your specific hardware model. The second major option is switching to iPhone, which is a recommendation that will surprise viewers who associate this channel with Google criticism, but which deserves honest consideration as a genuine alternative rather than being dismissed reflexively. Apple's business model is built on hardware sales rather than behavioral advertising, which means Apple does not have the same structural financial incentive to maximize data collection from your device that Google has. iOS allows local device operation with significantly less cloud account dependency than Android 16 will require, and Apple's App Tracking Transparency Framework has demonstrably reduced the volume of third-party behavioral tracking occurring on iOS devices compared to Android. iPhone is not a privacy-perfect solution. Apple collects its own categories of data, and its privacy claims deserve skepticism and verification rather than blind trust. But for users whose primary concern is escaping mandatory Google account authentication and the behavioral data collection that accompanies it, iOS represents a genuinely different data relationship than mandatory account Android 16. The third option is the de-Googled Android approach, using a phone specifically designed for privacy from the hardware level. The Fairphone 5 and the upcoming privacy-focused devices from manufacturers specifically targeting the privacy market ship with either no Google services or with easily removable Google services as a core product feature rather than an afterthought. These devices pair well with Calyx OS or Graphene OS installations and offer the additional advantage of repairability and longevity that extends the useful hardware life significantly beyond what mainstream flagship phones typically provide. The practical preparation steps you need to take before June 2026 start with your data. Before you change your device or operating system, you need to export everything from your current Android and Google account that you want to preserve. Google Takeout at takeout.google.com allows you to download a complete archive of every piece of data Google holds across every service you use. Do this before making any changes. The archive will be large. Download it to external storage and verify the contents before proceeding. Your contacts need to be exported as a VCF file. Your calendar events need to be exported in ICS format. Your photos need to be backed up to local storage or to a privacy-respecting alternative like Image running on your own hardware before you remove Google Photos from your workflow. Your application dependencies need honest inventory before you commit to a de-Googled Android installation. Open your current phone and look at every application you use regularly. For each application, ask specifically whether it requires Google Play services to function and whether a privacy-respecting alternative exists. Banking applications are the category most likely to cause practical problems on de-Googled Android because many banking apps use Google's Safety Net or Play Integrity API to verify that the device is running an unmodified certified operating system. Graphene OS has developed specific solutions for this problem through its sandboxed Google Play feature, which runs a completely isolated instance of Google Play services in a container that cannot access the rest of your system, allowing banking apps to function while preventing Google's infrastructure from monitoring your broader device usage. This sandboxed approach is one of Graphene OS's most practically significant features for users whose banking applications would otherwise block installation on a de-Googled device. The app replacement layer of your exit plan requires finding alternatives for every Google application currently in your daily workflow. Gmail replacement with Proton Mail or Tutanota, Google Maps replacement with Organic Maps for offline navigation, and Magic Earth for real-time traffic. Google Search replacement with Kagi for paid privacy, first search, or DuckDuckGo for free privacy-respecting search. Google Chrome replacement with Firefox or Brave depending on your extension requirements and privacy preferences. Google Drive replacement with Proton Drive or a self-hosted Nextcloud instance. Each replacement has a learning curve measured in days rather than weeks, and each delivers privacy improvements that compound across every session of daily use after the transition. The timeline for executing this exit plan matters, and June 2026 is not as distant as it might initially feel when you consider the preparation steps involved. The ideal sequences to export your Google data now, identify your application dependencies now, order or prepare your target hardware now if switching devices is part of your plan, and execute the operating system installation at least 4 weeks before the June deadline to allow time for troubleshooting any issues that arise with your specific hardware, and application configuration. Attempting to rush this transition in the final days before the deadline under time pressure is how mistakes happen and data gets lost. The mandatory Google account requirement in Android 16 is the clearest signal yet about the direction Google intends to take the relationship between Android users and Google's data collection infrastructure. Each successive Android version has made the optional elements of Google's services progressively more difficult to avoid and progressively more deeply integrated into the core device functionality. Mandatory account authentication is the logical endpoint of a progression that has been underway for years, and it is not the final step. Users who accept this requirement without exploring alternatives are accepting a baseline of data collection that will become more extensive with each subsequent Android version as Google continues optimizing the platform for advertising intelligence rather than user privacy. The exit plan described in this video is available to you now. The window to execute it before the mandatory requirement activates is open now. Subscribe for specific step-by-step installation guides for Graphene OS, Calyx OS, and the complete application replacement stack that makes degoogled Android fully functional as a daily driver before June 2026.